Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's your boy, Delightful Kissboy, and today, because it's 420, I want to talk a little bit about drug, alcohol, substance usage in general. Kind of my opinions on it, my history with some of it. Spoiler alert, it's not that much. And also kind of what I've seen in other people and friends and people I know and stuff like that. If I use any names in this, they're going to be kind of anonymized. I'm just going to kind of come up with an arbitrary name for people because I don't want to out them or whatever, you know. Even though a lot of these stories, they're not that big of a deal. But yeah, let's just start off with like my philosophy about drug use, drugs in general, that sort of thing. Okay? Overall, I'm pretty neutral on the subject, you know. In general, like, actually, let me start off with just my drug usage over time. Pretty much the only drugs that I do is caffeine and marijuana, all right? THC, okay? And in the marijuana, I have it like once every 6 to 12 months. I think the last time I smoked was back in Vegas in like July. Yeah, I don't think I've smoked since then. I'm going to be smoking pretty soon, though. My friend's bachelor party is coming up, so we're going to get down a little bit, you know. But I don't drink. I don't do anything harder than weed. Arguably, caffeine might be considered harder than weed. I don't know. There's one guy, I'll get to this, but there's one guy I know who told me that caffeine had more of an effect on him than cocaine did, which I'm highly speculative of. But could also just be because he's done a lot of cocaine. So, who knows? So maybe legitimately a coffee does more to him, but I find that hard to believe. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but yeah, that's basically what I do. I only started smoking weed in my late 20s. I think it was when I was like, I don't know, maybe 27 or so. I'm 30 now, for reference, for those who don't know. So only a few years, and I do it like once every few months socially, usually now. I started off trying to do it as a sleep aid kind of a thing, because your boy suffers from a little bit of insomnia, probably from my copious caffeine usage. I drink a lot of coffee, and I used to drink a lot of energy drinks, which was a little bit bad, okay, but I am a caffeine junkie, okay, I'll admit that. I'm completely addicted, and it's great. But anyway, so that's kind of my history with it. Now you may be wondering, why don't you drink? You know, because at least in America, I think mostly around the world, to be honest, it is extremely common for people to drink alcohol. And in general, there's like nothing wrong with it. You know, if you're an adult, people enjoy it. You can have some brewskis with the bros, etc., etc. And I've got no problem with the drinking. The thing is that I just kind of know myself and I know my family history, because I'm an Irish boy ancestrally, and I come from a family of alcoholics, right? A lot of people who cannot handle their booze, you know, they drink way too much of it, and that comes from kind of both sides of my family. And I was like, you know what? I just don't really want to fuck with that. On top of that, I just kind of have an addictive personality overall. So I kind of realized that about myself. It is extremely hard for me to break a habit that I've already kind of gotten myself ingrained into, sans a chemical addiction aspect of it, you know? I just have a hard enough time handling that kind of a shit, so why would I want to have something that is actually physically addictive, you know? Just didn't seem like a wise decision. So this kind of ties into my philosophy a little bit. That's why I want to start with kind of my history with it. Overall, when it doesn't come to like extremely toxic, horrible shit like fentanyl and, you know, heroin and meth and shit like that, which I do not condone using at all. But when it comes to kind of more minor stuff or things that maybe aren't nearly as bad, I would just say know your situation, be honest with yourself, and really try to be honest, and ask yourself if you think that you're going to be able to handle it. That would be my recommendation to you. Because I did that with myself, and I realized, no, I cannot. You know? And I'm pretty confident in that, because every time, so like, you know, if I go to a place and somebody gets a nice cocktail or whatever, a nice drink that looks tasty, usually I'll take a little sip. I'll be like, hey, can I get a little sip of that? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, man. So I take a little sip, and every single thing that I've tasted that has alcohol in it, for the most part, just tastes good to me. I used to be Catholic, and when I drank the communion wine as a child, I enjoyed it, which was alarming to my mom, because I mean that shit is the most watered down vinegary bullshit imaginable. And I was like, oh, that tastes pretty good. And so it's just like that kind of a thing. It's not a good sign, you know. It's definitely a sign that I would become very, very addicted to it. So I held off. I still have not. I don't drink. You know, I take little sips every once in a while just to kind of get a little taste of it. But overall, I love that like fermented flavor, right? So I've kind of found that in like things like kombucha, for example, which have small amounts of alcohol in them, but it's nothing, you know, significant. But I really like the flavor of kombucha, that kind of stank to it. And so I'll drink that, you know, if my friends are like, you know, getting brewskis or whatever, I'll just get a little bit of that booch, which is unfortunate because kombucha, I think, costs quite a bit more than the brewskis with the bros. But, you know, what can you do? What can you do? So I would say kind of, you know, find some substitutes. If you're a person that you've realized, I can't handle this, I want to take a risk with this, you know, just try to find alternatives that you can employ. So, for example, like, another example was when I was in high school, my friends, some of them went in on a hookah together, you know, because they were really into smoking hookah for some reason. It's kind of fucking stupid in hindsight, but they liked it, whatever. And so when they would smoke hookah, I would just stop by the gas station on the way over and get, like, I mean, it's kind of childish, you know, but I would get like a Red Bull and some like candy or whatever, you know, because basically what are they doing? They're just inhaling, you know, fruity flavored smoke. So, I mean, I'll just eat some candy. I don't really know what's worse for you, smoking hookah or eating candy, but I chose to eat candy, which is like a little baby boy, you know, sitting there. But here's the thing. If your friends are good friends that are worth keeping around, they're not going to give you too much shit. They're going to be like, okay, you know, he's doing his thing, and we're just hanging out, having a good time. People don't really care. I mean, kind of the whole, at least from my experience, the whole thing with peer pressure is a little bit overblown, I would say. I would say that most people don't really give a fuck if you partake or not. I will say, though, that there's kind of a thing there's kind of a phenomenon that happens, is what I'll say. If you kind of have a hardline stance from the beginning that you don't drink or you don't smoke or whatever, people will give you like way less shit when you don't do it, right? You know, so for example, because I just said from the beginning when I was like in high school or whatever, nah, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do any of that shit. People are like, oh, okay, DKB just doesn't do that. And they would never ask me about it after that point because they knew I had a hardline stance. So if I went to a party, people would just kind of be like, oh yeah, he's just here to chill out, sober, it's all good. You know, we're gonna get fucked up, but it's fine, he's doing his own thing. I will say that if you kind of give an inch, people will try to, you know, like they'll hop on that. They'll be like, oh, what are you talking about, man? You got fucked up like 3 weeks ago. What are you doing? Why, you know, what's one more night? Come on. You know, they might do a little bit more of that shit, but once again, I think it's a little bit overblown because there comes a point where it's like, yeah, they'll give you a little bit of shit up front, but if you have the you know, slightest bit of respect for yourself socially, you're not going to just do it because your friends are egging you on and giving you shit. Like, it's not, I don't think it's as much of a factor as people, as adults at the time, you know, were like, oh, peer pressure, it's this horrible thing. I don't think it was as big of a deal. I don't know necessarily, but that was at least my experience. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of my whole opinion on it. It's like hard shit, would not recommend at all. You know, more minor stuff at your own discretion, you know? And when it comes to things like drug dealing, etc., that's where we get into kind of a murkier area, obviously. Now, when I was in college, I, for 1 year, had a person who dealt coke living in a house with me. We'll call him Mark, all right? And that caused a lot of drama and issues throughout the year, because he would deal like right out of our house, right? And it was like multiple tens of thousands of dollars worth of like coke that he was dealing to people. Because here's the thing, one thing that you don't realize if you're growing up and you aren't really in the drug culture is you don't realize like how much, like how common that sort of a thing is, really. Especially in, an environment like college. There is just rampant drug use. And I mean, high school too. It's all over the place, at the very least things like weed, or in college, Adderall. My God, Adderall was all over the place. And you just kind of, if you're not in that culture, you might get the feeling, there aren't that really that people doing it. But it's like, no, pretty much, I don't know. I'm not going to throw a number out there, but just a large number of people who are doing that shit. Okay? And once again, a lot of these people, it's totally fine. Like, I've had friends who have even done some harder stuff, like coke, and they've been fine with it. But I've also known people who have gotten hooked on coke, for example, which is always a fun time. And that was kind of what caused some of the drama in our house, was that, so this guy, Mark, we'll call him, he was dealing coke, right? And people in the house, a lot of them enjoyed that because they would buy from him. And so we kind of let it slide. Me, of course, I was not too enthused about this, but at the beginning it wasn't really causing too many issues. We'd have parties, people would come over. That's a lot of the time that people would buy. He had his room kind of positioned by the lower back door, so people would kind of just come in, buy, and then dip out the back. So it was kind of out of sight, out of mind, and most of my time I was spending like in the fucking computer labs anyway, like a big old, nerd. And so I wasn't home a lot of the time, And we'd have parties. Parties were fun, and people would have a good time, whatever, It wasn't that big of a deal, but at a certain point, it started to become a very big deal. And it's because there's a person that was living in our house. Let's just call him Frank, okay? And Frank was dating a dude that we'll call him Greg. So Frank and Greg. And Greg previously had an addiction to cocaine before they started dating Frank, who lived in the house with us. And so Greg started coming over more and more and more, right? Because he was seeing Frank, obviously. And, he got to know the people in the house, and he realized that Mark dealt coke, And so that became a thing because Frank didn't want Greg to relapse and, get into coke usage again for understandable reasons. And so, you put two and two together. What do you think happened? All right. Behind Frank's back, Greg starts buying coke from Mark. And, Mark doesn't tell Frank about this at all. And then one day it somehow comes out. I didn't know how it came about, right? Because I was off doing, fucking off doing my own thing. And I came home and there's there's an odd vibe in the house. And I'm like, what is going on? And I hear, Mark was not the most emotionally stable person, let me tell you. I don't know, he's an interesting person. I was not a big fan of Mark, but I understand where he got to. Like, both of his parents died when he was still in school, and he had to like live with his parents and shit, or his grandparents. That would be fucked up if he had to live with his parents after they died. No, anyway, sorry, I shouldn't joke about that. But, so I can understand the factors that went into causing this guy to become the way he was. I mean, he's a smart dude, too. He's just an odd guy. Like, he was double majoring, too. Very capable. But anyway, it was this confusing thing, but I hear him screaming downstairs. And, like, I'm here, and so I go down to my room, and I'm just like, I'm just gonna ignore this for now. But then at a certain point, I started hearing him screaming about how Frank was gonna find themselves dead under a bridge. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? So I like go over there and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Like, what the fuck is going on? And so I find out that Frank found out about Mark dealing to Greg and threatened to call the cops on Mark, which obviously scared the shit out of Mark. Because, you know, if this is, he has a bunch of fucking drugs on him, and he's made all this drug money, and obviously, what can he do to push back? Because he's obviously in the wrong here. So the main thing he's gonna do is he's threatening to kill Frank. And I'm like, oh my fucking god, dude. Like, what the fuck is going on? This is escalated out of control. It kind of went from like 0 to 100. That's kind of what can happen when there are things like illicit substances involved. It's very explosive because all of a sudden it's just, you know, it's lawlessness, right? There's no external authority that can get cleanly involved here. So it's this whole thing because, you know, Frank is obviously hugely pissed at Mark, and understandably so, you know, and so this shit is just escalating out of control. And so I'm trying to figure out what the fuck's going on. We kind of had like a little intervention, like a powwow thing. And what was funny about it is, like, I'm not buying any of these fucking drugs for any of these people. I'm not really involved at all. But I kind of, for some reason, at a certain point, I just kind of like, everybody was kind of like mad at me because I was kind of just getting involved when I really shouldn't have been, but I just was, you know, I was trying to like figure out what to do. There's this other guy that I fucking hate, this dude, who would always be over at her house. Let's call him, I don't know, Larry. Alright, Larry fucking sucks, that guy. But Larry would always come over to her house and just be hanging out all the time because he would buy a shitload of coke from Mark, right? And this guy, I mean, he didn't live there, but he was for some reason in the intervention. I'm like, dude, you don't even fucking live in this house. Because what I was trying to say is I was like, hey, you know, fucking Mark, you can't deal in the house anymore, right? Because there's all this shit that's happening. I don't want to be involved with this. This isn't fair to the people who just want to live here and not get in legal trouble. I'm like, dude, continue to do whatever the fuck you're doing. I don't give a fuck. But do it outside of the house. Now, of course, in hindsight, I mean, obviously, Mark didn't want to do this because it increases the likelihood that he's going to get caught, you know? So he doesn't want to do that. But, you know, he's kind of agreeing to it at the time, but then he's pissed at me. And, like, I kind of got heated and I told him, like, shut the fuck up. And then some people were, like, on my case because I was getting mad, you know? And then one of my other friends, we'll say, we'll call him Caden, okay? Caden got mad at me because I was he found out I was asking around about his coke use because I was, you know, spoiler, concerned about my boy. He's like, back the fuck off, DKB, it's not your fucking business. And I was like, dude, I'm not gonna apologize for being concerned about you. So you go fuck yourself. So it was getting heated. It was getting absolutely heated, and people were mad at me, and I was just being like, dude, like, and fucking Larry was calling me unreasonable for not letting Mark deal in the house. And I'm like, first of all, you don't even fucking live here, Larry. Go fuck yourself. And second of all, you only give a shit because you buy fucking coke from Mark in our house. So you can go fuck off. What are you even doing here? What are you doing here, Larry? You know, it's just like, that guy, by the way, later, major fucking creep. Anyway, Larry sucks, okay? So there's this whole ordeal, and people are, you know, their tempers are rising. It's just this big fucking drama. And eventually it kind of soft resolved itself as kind of a Cold War thing. Luckily, this was kind of towards the end of the school year, and so it was kind of like, we resolved, we're just kind of gonna like wait out the rest of the year, and then we're going to have Mark and his kind of posse. It was a big house, by the way. I think we had like 12 people living in the house. We'll have Mark and his group move the fuck out for the next year. This was junior year of college, by the way. And we're just going to get new people after that, and hopefully it'll all be good. You know, it'll be calm, cool, and collected after that point. And it kind of, you know, there were some hiccups here and there, but overall it became much more chill. And so that story all to say is that drug dealing is a complicated thing. And even though I kind of don't, you know, I don't really condone people for, you know, using drugs, right? It's your own prerogative. do what you will, whatever, you know? Once again, you know, if it's affecting other people in your life, I just say, I don't fuck with drug dealing, okay? There's way too much drama that's involved. I don't think, here's the thing, it's like, people can have whatever philosophy they want about that kind of a shit, you know? Where it's like, oh, well, these people are, you know, choosing to buy from them, it's their fault. And I agree, it's like the onus is more, I guess, on the individual, but at the same time, the plug doesn't need to be doing this. And they're fully aware of the, you know, implications. And I'm not talking about dealing weed, you know, weed, it's fine. I mean, I don't really have much of an opinion on it, okay? Because it's not as addictive of a substance. I'm talking about shit like coke, shit like heroin, you know? People, they can convince themselves that, you know, I have no responsibility around this. These are people who just want to buy this shit. I'm just supplying them. If I wasn't doing it, they'd be getting it some other way. You can convince yourself of that, but I don't buy it, dude. You see what the fuck you're doing. You see the people that are coming back to you week over week. You're profiting off of their addiction. I think it's fucked. All right? So fuck Mark. Fuck Larry. Larry wasn't dealing, but just I had to throw that in there. Fuck Larry. Et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of my position on it. I don't really have any opinion on the people who use drugs, but I do have a stronger opinion on the people who choose to sell them illegally, you know? It's not a good one. I don't hold those people in high regard. I do not fuck with Mark. I have not hit up Mark at all since college, and he can go fuck himself. I don't give a shit. He seems to be doing fine, though, as far as I can tell. You know, people, some people, there's no such thing as karma. People don't get what's coming to them. Things just happen. But there you go. I mean, that's kind of, you know, this is just my opinions on this shit. I've seen how drugs have affected a lot of people that I know. For example, there was another person who was living in the house at the time. We'll call him, I don't know, Tyler. Okay, so Tyler, he was a person that, the way I heard it, was that he had some sort of a medical issue, like a surgery or something, when he was younger. And they prescribed him opioids as a, you know, painkiller type of thing. I'm talking about like oxys and shit like that. And apparently that whole situation got him hooked on opioids. And this dude would just, every single time he'd come back from classes, he would just be completely barred out. He would just have Xanax all the time. I would always come home and he'd be just laid out on the couch, you know, fucking barred out of his mind watching Trailer Park Boys. Because he was just, you know, he was a junkie basically. He was addicted to Xanax. I remember he'd just be walking around like a total fucking idiot, you know. He would buy these, or he wouldn't buy them, he would steal. A lot of shoplifting in our house, which is, I don't know, I don't really have much of a problem with. But he would shoplift fucking, it was like pre-packaged grilled cheeses from the store. They're like frozen. Or it was like something like that, and he would just put them in this like toaster oven and heat them up. And I remember he like did that shit, and you would like, I think you'd heat it up like in a plastic wrapper, but like he took it out and he was so fucked out of his mind that he started like biting on the wrapper, like thinking it was the food, and he was kind of like donkey lipping it for like 3 minutes before he realized, oh, I need to actually like open the bag to get to my fucking, you know, toaster oven grilled cheese. It was pretty, I mean, that was funny, I'll admit. That was very funny, but it was very sad to see. I've heard that since graduating, he may or may not have gotten hooked on heroin, which is a bit of a tragedy. I really feel for the guy. And it's especially fucked up if that is all true, that he basically got hooked on opioids because of a prescription that he got. And I've heard many stories about that, so I would recommend to people, you know, if you don't have to use opioids for some kind of condition, I would highly recommend you don't, because they're highly, highly, highly addictive. And I just wouldn't fuck around with it. I would say you're better off having some pain you know, getting into that fucking shit. I mean, as you can see, there's like a fentanyl epidemic in America, and that shit is fucked. Okay, so you know that's another drug I don't condone. But you know, I'm getting a little into deep shit. I've seen some people. I've known some people. I was in a band. I saw this lead singer of another band that we played a lot with got hooked on heroin. I mean, this dude was just like a shell of his former self. We saw him at this party one time, and he was just like totally gaunt, and like he had this just the darkest rings under his eyes. He just looked completely like shit, like he was just lifeless. And so, I mean, anything like that, don't fuck with it, right? But as far as, you know, alcohol goes, as far as weed goes, as far as, I don't know, I lump in like mushrooms and other psychedelics, you know, because people aren't really getting addicted to LSD. I would say just kind of know your limits, you know, and that goes also for like mental health conditions that you may or may not have or that run in your family, right? Because, you know, we talked a lot about the highly addictive shit, but things like LSD and shrooms can kind of trigger or interact with mental disorders in a way that is not good. Even weed can do that, all right? And that's why I try to have weed sparingly, is because I have some amount of history in my family of mental disorders, you know, things like bipolar disorder and depression, etc., etc. And so I'm just like, I don't really want to fuck with this shit too much, because I mean, like, if you take too much weed, you can induce like minor psychosis symptoms, at least. I don't know enough about it. I'm just like, you know, there's no reason to push it, right? But especially with like psychedelics and shit like that, that can really exacerbate like an underlying mental health condition, which you may not even know about, right? And so I would be highly cognizant, you know, talk to your family about shit that runs in your family before it's like, oh, you know, people will tell you, it's like, oh, I just, you know, like LSD's awesome, you know, it's not like addictive, and you have these like crazy, you know, experiences, and you see all this shit, and yada, yada, yada. I'm kind of going on, but I kind of do want to just get on this topic just for a little bit before I close out the video. I gotta go to Easter dinner pretty soon. But, I had a friend, when we were in high school, we were planning to go to Burning Man, excuse me, after we graduated, because I'd heard some wild shit about it, and I was like, oh, that'd be pretty cool. But I ended up not going because I wasn't sure, when the tickets were on sale, I wasn't sure which school I was going to go to, and there were schools that like were potentially starting at the time that like Burning Man was going, or very close around that. I can't remember exactly the details. I think on top of it, I just kind of got like some cold feet, to be honest. I ended up going on a tour with my band instead, and that was a good time, which you know, maybe a story for another time. But anyway, it was me and two other dudes, and we were committing to going to Burning Man, but me and the other guy bailed, and then this one dude, let's just call him Pete, okay? Pete, who I was really good friends with in high school, he ended up going to Burning Man by himself. This dude's a very interesting guy. Pete's great. I haven't really kept in contact with him much over the years, but and we kind of, you know, we kind of grew a little more distant in college, but I always, you know, liked the guy a lot. And he was just a very interesting person. He kind of, when he was in high school, he was very depressed, which was interesting, and it would like, he was kind of reckless with his behavior because of that depression. So he was very into like parkour, like free running, that sort of a shit, and he would just send it. He didn't give really a fuck if he got hurt at all, because he just really didn't give a fuck about anything. And towards, I think, like the end of high school, he got really into quote unquote urban exploration, which is basically hobbyist breaking and entering. He would break into just random places, you know, like abandoned places or whatever that were still technically private property. He broke into the fucking mall one time after hours, and he was part of like these groups, and these groups would like kind of just meet up, and they would try to break into different places. Like he broke into our university's library after hours by going through the steam vents in like summer. It was crazy. Dude was like doing some Mission Impossible shit. Anyway, he of course would be the one to go to Burning Man by himself, obviously. You know, why wouldn't he? And so he goes, And what was interesting is like all the way up at that point, he'd been super depressed, yada, yada, yada. And he was like going into computer science because his parents basically wanted him to. You know, I think he was like somewhat interested in it, but he was like ultimately he just, I don't know, he just kind of going with the flow. And he went to Burning Man, did a fuckload of peyote and LSD and shit, and came back and decided, I want to be an environmental sciences major now. Fuck my parents. And so, like, he had this, like, epiphany, and he'd done all this shit, you know, these psychedelics at Burning Man, and came back and completely changed his life direction to doing something that he was more passionate about, supposedly. I mean, overall, at the time, I thought that was a kind of like a positive thing. You know, he had this epiphany, he kind of got the confidence to stand up to his parents. He seemed a lot happier when he got into college. He like started getting into like climbing a lot. I think he might have been into climbing before he was, but he like was doing it, and he like got a job at the climbing gym that we had, and he'd plan out these routes, and he got a girlfriend, and he was just having a good time. I've talked to him a little bit over the years, and I think he's expressed some amount of uncertainty as to whether or not he made the right decisions. But at the time, he was doing certainly a lot better. And so there are people that can have very positive experiences, but overall, I'd say that people just kind of have significant experiences. And like I saw this video about some dude on YouTube, I can't remember his fucking name, but he was like this dude who got in really good shape and would like go around, you know, fucking talking to girls on camera and stuff, you know, who started doing peyote and then just completely lost his mind, lost the plot. So it can go either way. And so once again, know thyself, you know if you can handle it. Nobody's going to know for sure if they can handle it, but make your best judgment based on mental health conditions. So that's what I'll say about psychedelics. And all in all, I just want to close it out by saying, you know, kind of the complications that may have kind of arisen from my lifestyle where I don't drink and I only do weed sparingly. I will say, you know, overall it's a lot easier than you'd think it would be if you're a person who partakes. But there are some complications that come up. And I think one of the biggest ones for me it was really kind of a gut punch. As I was dating this girl, and she would like partake in a lot of that kind of shit, or at least she used to, you know. She would definitely like smoke a lot and drink a lot and shit like that, or not a lot, you know, but she'd go to parties and kind of get fucked up or whatever, and it was whatever, that was her prerogative. But we were dating, and I was really into this person, and it kind of, the gut punch was, she was like, we were talking about like the future, you know, because we were just like, oh, like what if we get married, etc. I mean, we're at fucking high school, whatever. And she, and I don't know, we were talking about that kind of shit, and then we were talking about, you know, somehow we got on the topic of like drinking, and I was just like, oh no, I'm never gonna drink. And she said something about imagining us at like a fancy restaurant drinking wine together, and it was just like a gut punch to me, because I was like, oh my god, that sounds nice. And I'm just imagining the scenario where I'm sitting there and she's got her wine and I've got like my water, you know, just like, I don't know. And it hurt a lot hearing it from her. Overall, she was very supportive of that kind of thing, and I don't want to throw shade, but that's a comment that has like stuck with me over the years. That has honestly been like one of the bigger things, is just like, it's just, I don't know, coming from a person that you're romantically involved with and them wanting to have this experience with you that ultimately you can't share, you know? Ultimately, like, maybe at some point I'll realize, like, maybe I can have, like, a little bit, but I don't want to fuck with it. My dad, he was one of the people that, like, saw the family history, and he was like, I'm the one that's going to break the cycle. I'm going to break the chain. And it ended up biting him in the ass. And so I don't want to do that, but at the same time, it does hurt to just think about, like, when I was thinking about doing, you know, going to parties and shit and being sober, I wasn't really that, like, I didn't really feel that left out, you know? I would just kind of be sober, and there'd usually be a few people there that were sober enough that I could just talk to them and have a good time. And it was never really that big of a deal, but just thinking about it in this one instance with my romantic partner just was a gut punch, for sure. So I'd say that was the biggest one. There are definitely times, like, my friends will have, like, cocktail parties and shit, And I do feel like a little left out sometimes, you know. But as you get older, you know, once you kind of make it past your 20s, there are a lot more people that are kind of circling back around to like, I gotta lay off of this shit, and it kind of just evens out. Like, there's a lot of people now who I know will like smoke or whatever, you know, every once in a while, but they've pretty much stopped having alcohol because it just floors them at the age of like 30, right? And so I'm not missing out on a ton. I've known people that have become alcoholics. It kind of goes one of two ways. It's like either you kind of get out of your 20s and you made it through it, and you're kind of done with drinking, or you're an alcoholic. And I've seen both of those scenarios. So you definitely don't want to become an alcoholic. And if you're thinking that you're missing out, people are going to be about on the same page as you once you get to your 30s. You know, it isn't really that big of a deal. Usually. So I would say that if you're pretty dedicated to staying sober most of the time, stick with it. It's really not as hard. You're not missing out on much from what I've heard and what I've seen. And you can still have fulfilling relationships. I think on top of that, one of the other things is that, like, conversationally, like, people kind of use drugs as like a kind of a social lubricant. All right. And I think that depriving yourself of that sort of a thing can allow you, or kind of force you, to develop confidence and skills in, you know, socially, that you kind of got for free by just kind of getting fucked up sometimes, you know? Like, you know, it's like I don't have an ability, when I go to a party, I don't have an ability to just like, just tune out and basically be fucked up, and people have the expectation that you're gonna be more lax and, you know, laid back and shit. It's like, no, I gotta like have a good time here besides like when I'm sober, you know? And so I kind of developed conversational skills over time, because, you know, if you don't really think about it, I don't really think about it a lot, but you kind of, when you do think about it, socialization is a skill, you know, it's a muscle, just like anything else. And so if you deprive yourself of tools that make it easier, you know, you're going to have to accommodate that, and you know, overall, I definitely don't regret it. I think it's done a lot of good for me. So let's summarize. I've been yapping for a while. I got to get ready for this dinner. I got to make a little dish before I head over. But all in all, I don't have much of an opinion on drug usage. You know, I don't really judge people for doing it. I would just highly, highly, highly recommend that you reflect before you choose to partake. That's all I'm asking, right? Do whatever you want to do, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend staying away from highly addictive illegal substances, right? That shit, don't fuck around with it. On drug dealing, I'm not a fan at all right? I think it fucks people up, and it fucks with people's lives in a way that I'm not comfortable with. Psychedelics, be cognizant of mental conditions that you may have, you know? And overall, I think that there's a lot of good that can come out of general sobriety, and it's not as hard as you would think, and I would highly encourage people to consider it, switching over to it or continuing it or whatever, and not feeling like they're really missing out on much. All right? That's all I'll say. That's kind of my position on it. Let me know what you think. Drugs are a complicated topic. There's a lot of opinions about it. There have been people who have seen people get absolutely destroyed by it, who may think that I don't have a hard enough stance. There are probably people who do drugs that are like, no, dude, it's all good. It's all good. What are you talking about? Sobriety. You know, people have highly, highly differing opinions on this shit, but I thought I'd just chime in on 420. So, hope you have a fun 420. Happy Easter. You know, do what you're gonna do. I'm not your fucking mommy. I'm not your daddy. And it's been good chatting. So, bye-bye.